That POS leaked for who knows how many years under here and soaked the chipboard underlayment, flooded and ruined the wood all the way back to here, which is where a dishwasher and countertop go. So it made it to there, ruined all of this. That's why I cut it all out. Clear back to here, and then clear to here, which is how we actually discovered it. There started to be a hump forming right here in the floor. We didn't know what it was. It's because water was flooding and swelling up that chipboard. So I've cut out all the wet chipboard, anything that was bad, cut it, clear back to here. Of course, the sheetrock is completely destroyed. So we're looking at a complete kitchen remodel. So to get an idea of the scope of this project, to replace that chipboard that was damaged, the fridge was right here and flooded, clear up under the dishwasher. So, I've chipped up the chipboard. I've removed the damaged chipboard and just kind of getting an idea for what I need to do here to replace these areas with 1/2-inch plywood. Leave the good chipboard and replace it with 1/2-inch plywood. So these are all the areas that were damaged. You can see up close here, it also softened a lot of the sheetrock, which I also removed. But I cut out all around the perimeter to where it was back to dry, good chipboard. And you can see here, even getting up behind the couch and whatnot. So that's kind of the extent of this, this project, what I needed. And then from work, I got one of these moisture meters so that we can tell, how wet something is. So you can see here, 10 to 14%-ish is fine for normal dry wood. And so I went around after I'd run the fans and dehumidifier quite a bit for several days in this room, just to make sure that the subfloor was completely dry. I strongly recommend getting one of these if you're doing any kind of moisture repair or anything. Just, you don't want to be putting stuff back over the top of wet wood. And it's kind of educational too, to just go around. Now, when I first ripped up this flooring and stabbed it into some of these spots, I was getting like 40% moisture. It's wringing wet. So I made the time. Yeah, see, it looks like it's wet right here, but it's not. It's still 12%. So, strongly recommend doing that. Make sure everything's dry. And then as I removed the linoleum for new cabinets that are going in, I also noticed another soft spot in the floor over here. So I cut out all that chipboard also. We'll just add that to the list of projects. The most helpful tool by far was this Wonder Bar crowbar to remove stubborn nails. And then of course my multi-tool oscillating tool for cutting sheetrock and wood, your skill saw, and then your other just miscellaneous tools for construction. Nothing else really specialized at that point. So I'm getting ready to square up the cuts I already made on the chipboard. When I was ripping out the chipboard, I was just cutting it, not really measuring, just getting back to dry. But now that I'm getting ready to lay down plywood, I want those cuts to be square to that wall, not just random, because then trying to match a piece of plywood to lay in there would be very difficult, wouldn't it? So I'm getting down there and getting ready to square up those cuts. And the first thing is making sure the depth of your saw is appropriate. And so it's 1/2-inch chipboard, so I measured 1/2 inch and did a little test spot, because you don't want to cut into your subfloor, right? Your floors, your panels below. So making sure that is right. And then just squaring it up. See, I've got a square here, and I'm making sure that these lines are going to be square to that wall. and that'll make the next step of cutting your plywood much easier. You won't have to cut oddball angled shapes and stuff like that. So now that I know I've removed all the damaged chipboard, I can cut back even further to make it as easy as possible on me here to make these cuts. And take your time to make these measurements and marks straight. It will save you so much hassle and rework later and gaps, and just makes a big difference in the quality of your work. So I've got a big long straight edge here, but you know, a snap line would be appropriate also to get all these things straight. Take your time, measure 3 times, cut once. You know, one of the sayings my dad, so my dad taught me, measure twice, cut once, right? Well, he a lot of times didn't do that. He would say, measure once, cut twice, measure again, cut 3 more times, cuss, get pissed off, go down to the store and buy a new part to try again. I didn't have the camera close enough here to show you properly, but plunge cut for that kind of saw, that kind of cut is super helpful. Here I'm going to show you the perfect use for your oscillating multi-tool. See, on this plunge cut I showed you before, I was only able to go back that far because the cupboard was in the way. Well, now I can't lift that chipboard out of there without fear of breaking it. So you take your, you know, your wood bit on your oscillating tool and cut in there to make a nice clean cut, so that when you lift that board out of there, it's not going to break or fracture or anything like that, and make your life much easier. That's just one of about 10 million uses of that tool just on this project that made life so much easier for me. You know, get yourself a garbage can set up or a bag set up like I've got here, and then clean up as you go. You see how I'm just throwing every nail, everything in the garbage as I go instead of just piling it somewhere. That way you're not moving stuff twice. Just, you know, much easier. Make it so much easier to do that. Okay, now I'm going to show you up close here what you'll have to deal with as far as removing nails and chunks of this stuff. So I've cut that little square out, but there's that nail there. You know, there's a million nails, right? And so getting up underneath them, and these are tough nails too, man. They've got those rifled ridges down them. I don't know what they're called, but they're just tenacious to get out. And so, you know, getting your little mini crowbar underneath them. And even with this one, you know, you can see me hammering in here. Super satisfying to film this, by the way. But, you know, getting it up out of there. And then some of them are so hard, like on this one, I could not pull that out by hand. Even with my 220-pound tub of guts, I had to stand up and stomp on that thing to pull that out. Pain in the ass, but that's what you got to deal with. And then just continue on. Okay, so I've cleaned up my workspace. I'm ready for the next phase finally, and that's to start cutting out new flooring. So you can see here, just draw yourself a little map, a little drawing of what you need. Take your measurements, and because we squared up everything, it's going to make your life so much easier. But draw it out on a little paper here, because you don't want to be going from memory. You know, saying, okay, 83.5 inches, I need to make that cut, and run out and make the cut, because you'll forget, something will interrupt you, you'll transpose 2 digits or something like that. So just draw yourself a simple little drawing here, and then you've got something to take out to your shop or wherever you're making your cuts at. Okay, now we're outside here where I make all my cuts under my little roof here. It's dumping rain all weekend, so I had to get out of the elements a little bit and do my stuff outside. Okay, let's see what I did here. Double check my measurements and squareness, and it's a good thing I did, because I was off a bit. So this, line, I was off 1/8 of an inch here, wasn't square, and then I was off 1/2 an inch on this measurement. Okay. The other thing is to draw out the lines a little further than you need for your saw, so that when you come along, you're not doing this. That gap's a little wide. Right there. There's enough there. And some there. Yeah, okay. Outlining the floor, so when I lift it up, I know exactly where to put this stuff. I slap it back down. So something I discovered was the thickness of the plywood became an issue. So I had to end up shimming underneath the plywood. And And that's because the chipboard was exactly a 1/2 inch thick, but finding exactly 1/2 inch thick new plywood was difficult. And I could only find 15-30 seconds, which actually is 7/16 of an inch thick. And so it was a 1/16 of an inch off on my floor here. So I ended up getting 1/16 inch shims and putting it underneath the floor before I glued it down. And now before I actually this is before the glue, but you know, I'm making sure before I do that. So using a credit card as a thickness gauge, using a level, going around and making sure. It might not be a huge deal like in hidden areas, but this area, this gap right here, is a high traffic area, obviously right in the middle of the kitchen. So I wanted this to be as perfect as I could get it. So that's what I'm doing here. Just kind of double checking my work before I make it permanent. These are the screws that I used. Now I have 2x6 decking, tongue and groove decking for my subfloor. So a 2 to 2.5 inch long screw is plenty to hold down a 1/2 inch sheet of plywood. You'll want to research your decking to, you know, make sure length. And then I went to use my Bosch drill. I love my cordless Bosch drill, but quickly realized it didn't have enough power. It's old and small, so then I had to bring out the bigger guns and go with my DeWalt.
Need more power. Also, don't forget to feed the cat. Kitty.
Okay, so I'm ready to start drilling these into the floor, and I quickly realize I need hearing protection because that is really loud. But driving the screw down to where it's just flush and barely buried. You don't need to just ram it clear through and smash the heck out of your plywood. Just enough to make it level so you can't really feel it. And then for spacing, you go every 6 inches along the perimeter, and then every 12 inches out in the middle, out in the field for spacing. And then don't forget, if you've cut your chipboard like I did, then you've removed those fasteners along that edge of that chipboard, the old stuff. So you need to also install new fasteners on that chipboard. Do not forget that. So for the next area, I was able to solve my shimming issue because I didn't like shimming if I didn't have to. And so what I did is I found a 1/4 inch plywood and just bought 2 of them, and it equaled exactly a 1/2 inch. So that eliminated my need for shims. But to do that, I needed to clamp the plywood together because I'm going to cut them at the same time. So you can see I'm using a snap chalk line and whatnot to make all my marks. But I also clamp this plywood so that I can cut it all at one time.
You know, speaking of skills my dad taught me, see this bench? I bought the metal frame and took it to Dad. And in his wood shop, he put in all these panels. And here I am using it for a workbench, throwing my saw on it. Oh, he'd be so proud of his son. This was actually harder than it looks too, because these aren't square. You know, he started these panels square, and then he gets to the end and it's like, what the heck? Not square. None of these were square. So he had to, you know, custom do the edges to make this fit. Fits. See that thing? That thing is great, especially as you get older. As you get over 50, it's a plywood carrier, especially if you got tennis elbow. Okay. What's the over-under on whether this is going to fit or not? Well, I hope you took the over because it doesn't fit. It's really close, but it didn't hit my size right. See, it's too tight. It's hitting right there. The whole panel needs to go this way. How much? I'll measure that, but there to there. Wow. How'd I miss it by that much? That's an inch. Well, that's probably what I did then, is I mismeasured or cut that an inch. So I need to cut an inch off more there so this can go that way. Yeah. And look, I'm about an inch off here. So that's exactly what I did. Well, at least I cut it. I made my mistake that way. So I can shove the whole thing this way. The only other thing I'm seeing here too is that's tight there, but this end, I need to cut some off of here too. Let's see. So I would think of what I could do here. I could either trim that so the whole panel can go this way, or I just trim that right there and let it go down. I'm gonna trim, well, yeah, I have to trim this because this little section's not sitting down either. That's not sitting down. No, it's not sitting flush either, but still. So, okay, back to the drawing and cutting board. So I discovered my problem here. I don't know how I could be off that far, but I'm not, because look at this end. Fits exactly like I measured it. The problem is it's not going under the sheetrock right here like I want it to. It's getting wedged in the sheetrock. I thought it would just slide right under. So I'm gonna take my multi-tool and cut that sheetrock because I want the flooring to be under the sheetrock anyway. You know, this is a good learning point. In the old days, when this house was built in 1980, they put the sheetrock clear to the bottom first, and then the flooring up against it. Now, code says put the flooring to the edge and let the sheetrock come down. Okay, so obviously I'm not going to change the whole house, but in cases like this, I'll cut off that sheetrock. And hopefully that gives me the room I need here. I don't think so. I don't think that's going to give me enough room for my mistake I made. But it'll make my mistake not look quite so bad. So what I'm doing here is just scoring, or making a mark with my pencil along the sheetrock
so I know where to cut. And stay tuned, because I did not make a mistake cutting that plywood. The plywood was right. The sheetrock was my whole problem.
Now I've found when I use the multi-tool to cut sheetrock, the clean wood saw seems to work better than the sheetrock saw. I mean, it just melts right through it and actually leaves a cleaner cut. So either I'm doing it wrong or it just works better. Now there is metal right here, that corner guard, so I should probably get a metal bit and cut that first. I'm also going to use my much hated safety glasses. Just like that.
These nails are a pain in the ass to get in there and get them out, especially without just destroying the sheetrock up above it. I don't know why I'm going through so much trouble. I probably should have just cut the sheetrock higher and not worried about it. But yeah, that's what you get.
See what I've done there is I've just dug that clear out. You know, down to the mud sill right there, that base plate. Okay, let's see if it fits. Oh, look at this. It fits. Oh, yeah. Show it that way. Oh, yeah. Oh, I didn't have to recut it. That's all it was. Yeah. Nice. Okay. So I have my 1/4 inch gap here that I want. Flush here. That's known as the cat highway, ever since I cut that out. So my gap here, flush here, flush here. Look at this. Oh yeah. Goes in here. That's a little wider than I would like. I could have gone 1/8 of an inch, but it's actually pretty good. And it's all one piece. Look at this bastard file. So remember when I put in this piece of wood and I didn't cut the sheetrock first, so it didn't fit, blah, blah, blah. To avoid that on this next piece, I know I'm gonna have to trim the sheetrock here. So I'm gonna do it ahead of time. And here's how I'm gonna make my mark. Take a scrap of plywood. So I know that has to go under there. So I'm gonna take my pencil and make a mark. I'm gonna make it a little bit above, you know, so the thickness of the pencil, you know, that edge like that. And I know at least stay above that line when doing my cut with my oscillating saw. Okay. See how that did that? It made a mark a little above that, but not so far that trim won't cover it up.
So those of you smarter than me will then see that I eventually just used the plywood as a guide instead of freehanding it on that mark. And it made it so much easier. But you know, these are the things you learn as you go. And I don't mind putting in my little mistakes and stuff for you all to see what I did and how to avoid those silly little things. Not really a mistake, but you know what I mean. It's just so much easier to use the plywood here than that pencil mark I made. You get the idea.
Here's a trick that can save you much frustration. When it comes to cutting out plywood in an odd shape, see this square, and then I've got a notch here and another notch there, come up over here, and then a piece here. Similar to the piece I did on the other side where it's odd. If you don't measure this correctly and do this trick, you will stack tolerances. And what that means is, if you measure and say, how big a piece of plywood do I need here? Or, you know, what's my shape? And you start drawing it out on your paper, you know, your paper that you're drawing it out. If you just go like this and say, that measurement is 31 1/4, okay? You know you need to cut it a little bit shorter to get it to fit, so you say 31 1/8. Okay, so on your drawing you write that, 31 1/8. And then you say, I need to make this notch 2.5 inches right there. And so you write 2.5 inches. And then you come over here and you say, this notch needs to be 3 inches. And you write 3 inches. You're going to stack tolerances, which means you're not going to cut it exactly, right? There's no perfect system. You also have the width of your saw blade, which takes out a bit, you know, 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch, depending. And the width of your pencil mark. You know, does your cut mark go, does your blade go right on the pencil mark? Does it go to one side? Does it go to the other? Those are tolerances. If you measure it and write down your numbers that way, you're asking for mistakes, those tolerances to build up. How you avoid that and eliminate those variables is to start at one point. Start right here, for example, in the corner, and measure all your measurements off of that point. In other words, go like this, like you did originally. Write down that number. And then come here and write down that number for that notch from here to here. And then come here and write down that number, okay? So you're doing it all from one side, one point. And then do the exact same thing measuring this way from this point, from this edge. Now we're gonna assume this edge is square to the wall. which I know it is because I pre-measured and cut this accordingly. So I know that this line is square to that wall. I measure how far this cutout needs to be, like this. And then I measure that. And then I measure the overall length. And then for this notch here, I do the same thing. I measure clear back to here. Way better chance of nailing it and getting it all to fit without having to take it back out and recut it. Okay, following my own guidelines of measuring and tolerance buildup, let's see how I did. Gaps. Alright. I like it. We're all there. So fit right in there. Get the gaps I want here, which out here I want like next to no gap. Here, you know, a little bit for expansion. This is probably the biggest cut. Biggest gap, I could have been another 1/8 of an inch longer right there, but geez, that's good. That goes nicely. Nice gaps here. That lines up with that. I like it. Okay, I am done with this floor. I can move on to my next project here. But I got it all screwed down all the way around. Everything looks really good. Really happy with how it all turned out. It's all pretty flat, you know, so my LVP will go on nicely. And then got all the way in here. However, I discovered, you know, as I was cutting the floor, the old chipboard out, I cut back to where it was completely dry. And when I cut it back, you know, I needed to reattach these edges because there's no nails along where I went. So along with all the nails around the whole project, I also reinstalled screws in the chipboard. When I got to this panel, look at this. I couldn't get a screw in. It'd go in there and it'd just disintegrate. I'm like, what's going on here? Well, and it's dry. You know, I got my moisture meter here. It's at 10% moisture, but it apparently has gotten wet in the past. If it gets over about 20% moisture, it'll do this, it'll swell up. And here's the weird thing, this panel's fine, and the adjacent one over there is fine. So just this 2-ish foot section is chipping up like that. So that means this has got to come up at some point. I'm going to wait on that because that project is going to happen separately from the kitchen. In other words, I'm putting flooring in here and will likely stop either there or in here somewhere. while we finish the whole kitchen. And then the next phase of this project will be the living room and the rest of the house. So for now, we can live with it like this, but I just know when I come back and rip up all the carpeting, because all the carpeting is going to go eventually, I know I'll have to address that, but for now, it's fine. In here, I can move on to my next phase.
So I finally got this piece to fit. You know, the simplest piece I need in the whole project, and it took me 3 times. But once I got it to fit in there, I could start noticing off to my right there, that it was sinking down too far. So I don't know, the subfloor or something, but I didn't like those gaps right there. So eventually I took it out and then put in shims. You see me stacking them up there. They're shims that don't compress, and I got that leveled out just right. So I'm getting ready to screw down this board, but I noticed right here the sheet metal from the heat register went under, and so I knew I needed to pre-drill through that sheet metal, otherwise the deck screw would not have gone through. And so I'm just kind of marking out the extent of the sheet metal so that I don't run a screw down there later. So that's what's going on there. And then I screw it down, and I'm done with this step. On to the next process.